Dan, great to have you back on the show, man. I think since the last time we talked and this one, were you doing something for like being up in space or something with what was going on? I was like flywheel training or something. Like, tell me a little bit about that happening.
Yeah, so thank you. It's great to be back. Thank you. Yeah, no, like the last 5 or 6 years was, I've been doing very heavily involved in research. It was completely unexpected, and it's developing this exercise device for astronauts. So like the exercise device is kind of a space aged Pilates reformer, but
Mhm.
there's kind of several advantages of that, but kind of the big thing is that or one of the big things is it allows astronauts to jump repeatedly in microgravity, which is
Mm.
an exercise countermeasure that's not previously been available to them. And what we believe is that will give better outcomes, and allow them better to mitigate the loss in fitness they have when they're in microgravity. But because that device is designed to work in microgravity, it can only really be tested properly in microgravity. So
Ah,
yeah, yeah. So that yeah, we've been very lucky that we've got to test it in microgravity a lot. So that's a pretty crazy experience, but yeah, that's what you'll have seen. Like,
hmm. Yeah, I've seen, it's funny when things sometimes get used for things you wouldn't expect them to. I think it was in the old Marinovich training sequences that they're using like some Pilates reformer. And I don't know how they got tuned onto that with like high powered athletes, and they're like blasting out like the adductors on it and they're like partner resisting and all this stuff. And I actually had a client had some Achilles issues, and that was I saw he's showing me his gym, like sending me a video, and I see this reformer, and I'm like, ooh, we can use that. I was thinking about Marinovich stuff, so that was a big staple of what we did there.
wow.
But I was thinking flywheel because I know with the flywheel, like I think that was invented because of astronauts or something like that, inertial resistance. So
I mean,
that's what
they're still intending to use it. So kind of the current Artemis uh, campaign to kind of go to the moon and back, and within the Orion spacecraft, they're putting a flywheel.
my.
Um, that is kind of still being used or still going to be used as an exercise countermeasure in microgravity and in space.
Yeah. I'm sure that I know we'll talk about impulse, force, rate of force development and impulse today. I'm sure that runs a little bit different in microgravity than standard, but I'm sure the main principles are the same. You've been prolific like in book writing. I think in our last podcast you might had one or maybe two books out, and it seems like every couple of years I see on Twitter you got something else that's been new. What books have you been put out just recently?
So thank you. Like I've put out 2 books this year, or actually, sorry, I put out 2 books last year in 2025.
Mm.
First at the start of the year was kind of the third and final book in my Force series, and so it's kind of like the first Force book was kind of how biomechanics relates to training. The second Force book was the biomechanics of sprinting specifically. And then this third book is it's called Strength Training for Endurance Performance, but like it's really kind of the biomechanics of uh, of longer duration efforts. So that was the book at the start of 2025, and then the book I released at the end of November is called The Practice of Change: The Art and Science of Training, and that's kind of the most philosophical book that I've
Mm.
written. It feels like it draws a lot of the threads together of things that I've been writing about for the last 5 years. So it kind
Mm.
of weaves together kind of stuff I had in the black book of training wisdom and some of the stuff in force. Uh, but yeah, like it's just generally kind of thinking about, well, you know, what makes training successful and why, and in particular that, yeah, like our bodies want to adapt.
Yeah.
And we don't need to force them to do that. Like they will adapt. So I hope that message kind of tempers some of the more kind of strident kind of okay, well, I'm going to beat my body into submission in the training process type commentary.
Yeah. When you write books, and I'll just say kudos for like 2 in a year is amazing. I mean, I'm just wrapping up. It's been almost 8 years now since I wrote my last one, and I had one I kind of started and then nixed it, and then I'm just finishing up one that'll be out this year
Wow.
on aquatic and so it's like, but it took a long time, and I'm like, man, you are just cranking them out. Like, so awesome for that. I was going to ask you, because I know it's like this for me, but do you feel like in writing, um, like it's almost like a learning process too, in the sense of like, I know for me, I have all these ideas in my head. I almost have to put it on paper and in a book to make it orderly. And then I'm writing and I'm like, oh, like, yeah, this is better. Or this does reflect this part of my training. Uh, I guess what I'm trying to ask you is just tell me a little bit about your process where I don't know, it's not like training related, but I'm just curious how someone's so prolific in writing in this field. You know, you get your ideas and then going through it. Just tell me a little bit about that process.
Like it really depends on the book. So the first book I wrote, I never really thought about, uh, that people were going to read it. Like I
Mm,
just felt like I had something to say, and I wanted to get it down on paper. Um, so it was kind of like, yeah, I just wanted to write down, what I thought I understood. Um, then, then kind of towards the end of finishing that book, I was talking to a colleague, and he was kind of like, because I felt very uneasy about self promotion. And he was kind of like, well, you want people to read it, don't you? And it was like a penny
mhm,
drop. And then kind of, so then the next training book or the next book I wrote was a philosophy book. And that was kind of like, you know, a, a labor of love. And, it was definitely a learning journey. But like you described, I felt like I had something to say in this area of the philosophy of science, but I didn't really know what it was. So I was just doing a huge amount of reading, and the kind of, across the whole range of topics, and it was kind of exciting, and um, yeah, I was learning what I was going to say as it went along.
mm,
The next book after that was Force, and that was kind of that's really a book which, I mean, if you lecture, so to go back to what you said, like that, like when you're writing things, I absolutely agree with you that suddenly you discover all of these things that you didn't know you know, and you're kind of like, where did that come from? Or like, wow, I didn't know I knew that. Or um, and so like writing is definitely a process where that happens, and that really happened with me for this last book. But another thing that can act like that is lecturing.
mm,
So
yes.
often, yeah, like you stand in front of people and things come out of your mouth which you
Mhm,
didn't realize that you knew. And especially kind of when I used to work with John Goodwin as well, we'd lecture together, we bounce things off each other, and it's just a hugely creative forum.
mm,
Um, so yeah, the Force book, uh, yeah, was largely I knew exactly what I was going to say right at the start, but that's because those messages had already been developed in a different forum.
mm. Yeah, force. Yeah, I know we'll get into that. I want to ask you about the science of change briefly, just because it would strike me that a lot of that's in motor learning. I almost look at, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, or how that goes actually, how the book travels. I just have viewed motor learning as almost, it's not the last frontier, but it's almost the one that people don't. I don't think people jump into like sports performance and think, "Oh man, I want to hit motor learning hard like right away." It's usually like, I guess I gotta learn about it, and like, and eventually, the more you coach, the more you realize, oh wow, this is really, really important. In fact, the pedagogy, you can use the fancy word to make it sound more important, but like coaching and learning is ultimately the big thing. But yeah, tell me a little bit more about. I'm curious about that book. Like, what different aspects of human development did you really draw from to put that one forward?
Yeah, no, I agree with you on both learning. Like, when I was doing my masters, it definitely seemed very dry, and the
Yeah.
lectures
Yep.
also seemed very dry. Um, yeah, like the book's in four parts, and those. those parts, they're not labeled as such, but like
Yeah.
they very loosely go through philosophy as the first part, physiology as the second part, mechanics as the third part, and then motor learning as the fourth part.
Mm.
So kind of there is very much is that flow to it, and I agree with you as well. Kind of like I'm always kind of when you look at coaching, kind of I think kind of when people are starting out coaching, they miss the last steps of what you have to do to be a good coach. So kind of
Mhm.
like I think that like if you say you're in the gym, like that, element number one is that you need to know what it looks like. And many people just sort of stop there, like, okay, I know what it looks like, so now I know. You go, no, like, once so that's just kind of descriptive. Then you have to know, okay, well, why does it look like that? And understanding why it looks like that
Mhm.
helps you to be able to coach people. Uh, that's mechanics. But that's also not where coaching ends,
Yeah.
because even if you know the why, even knowing the why and being able to explain, it looks like this, I want it to look like that, and you're doing this because of this. Even if you can explain the why to an athlete, that doesn't mean that they're going to be able to change what they do.
Mm.
So the final part of it is actually knowing, well, what do you need to say or do in order for something that changes? And each of those steps is a different skill. And kind of just being able to describe what you want to see, which in a lot of coaching qualification is where that qualification ends. It is just the beginning of the journey. Like you then have to have a much deeper understanding of why things happen. But that's not enough. You then have to understand, well, how do you change stuff? So very much kind of like there's that flow in that book, from kind of, okay, well, what, why, how,
Mhm.
you know, as it were.
It's a very book type topic, just because that's not something that you would post on social media and get like viral. Like no, just because if someone's like looking at a post for 5 or however many seconds, that's not going to matter. Usually, it's like what's the exercise, what's the protocol, what's this, and it's kinda like that same thing, though, like writing a book, you have to dig into something before your subconscious starts to really invest itself, and you're not even writing it, you're in the shower or in bed, and you're getting these ideas, like, bam, bam. That doesn't happen with the very short form content, and I think that lifetime science of change is very similar. It's not just the one couple exercises, few positions you're supposed to hit in this movement or whatever, or even like, oh, external cues are great. I heard external cues during this research project help blah 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 percent. It's like it is like that mastery. It's all those things. So I
Yeah.
embarrassingly I saw the cover of the book. I'm like, that's awesome. I haven't got it yet, so that's on my list. But you saying change, like the ease of the process. You mentioned that, and that does segue into something I wanted to ask you, which I know you've learned a ton from Dan John. Dan's awesome. He's been on this podcast a bunch. Um, and you had mentioned that it wasn't until a few years ago that you tried easy strength, that easy strength method. Tell me a little bit about that. What you learned from that, and what got you to it. Or why did you avoid it for so long? And what did you learn from that?
Yeah, I don't think I was avoiding it,
Yeah.
and I think you know, one of the things I talk about in this book is kind of like the difference between principles and programs. Yeah, so kind of like the fundamental principle or one of the fundamental principles of easy strength, which is like don't go too hard, like
Yep.
little and often over
Mhm.
the long haul. I think I was adhering to in my training. So it
Uh,
wasn't a radical new approach for me. What I hadn't done is the program,
yeah.
that's laid it out in ease of strength before, because I guess I, enjoyed going a little bit more heavy, and enjoyed having maybe a little bit more variety or less variety in what I do, and just liked doing my own programs.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, like when I started doing Dan's Easy Strength, like yeah, it works.
Hmm.
You get stronger, and like even though I fully expected and subscribed to the idea that it would work, like I was still it's still quite staggering how effective it can be.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I, I mean, I, and I mean, this doesn't relate to Easy Strength, but kind of, uh, like you then reflect back on some things, and I know that kind of when I did my all time best snatch, like which is years and years and years ago, and it isn't that great in the global scheme of things. I snatched 97 kilos hang snatch, power hang snatch, but that was built off just doing loads and loads of reps at 55 kilos. There wasn't much else to it. Like it's a very kind of pure kind of uh, example of easy strength. Um, so yeah, like that's my kind of one of reflection. One of the things I had with easy strength, and then the other thing was just that I got to a stage where I really needed someone to be telling me what to do,
Hmm.
and doing Dan's program, you know, did that for me. And it's interesting as well because if you follow Dan on social media, as I'm sure you do, like he has his own coach, and like in the last yeah half a year, like I've got a friend who's now telling me what to do,
Hmm.
uh, and and I've had the best period of training I've had for some years, like completely kind of giving him responsibility for me and taking me out of the equation. Um, Sorry, I'll stop talking in a second. But which again is kind of one of the things that I talk about in this most recent book is that you need a coach to not self sabotage.
Yeah.
Uh, and even when you know that, you still do it. So for me, kind of yeah, I'm training so much better now. I don't have to think about it, and I just turn up and I do what Tomasz tells me to do.
Yeah.
Uh,
Athletic performance is built on a spectrum of training methods, from high velocity skills to power training to strength work. And on one end of that spectrum, on that strength end, you have the most targeted work in the form of machines. And this is part of the reason that so many top speed and strength coaches have their favorite machines to deliver that targeted stimulus. For decades, Hammer Strength has been a top provider of reliable, effective machines that are trusted by coaches and athletes worldwide. They fit seamlessly into that total performance program, delivering that targeted strength stimulus. When it comes to your machine-based strength training needs, think Hammer Strength. Yeah, just for reference too, I should have mentioned easy strength. I think a lot of people listening are familiar, but I mean, to me, it's just basic as 2 sets of 5. Lift heavy but not hard, and I think there's different iterations, right? But the core of it's just 2 sets of 5 with the key lifts, and you basically do it every day because it's not hard. um, and yeah, I tell you, it is interesting because I always find myself coming back to it for the most part. I'll stray, creatively just to do it, and then I just come back. I'm like, this is pretty much the best thing for my body to stay in balance and do other things, go rock climbing, go back and do easy strength, do a sprint workout, go back and do easy strength. Like it's just, it keeps it that variable very simple and it less places to go off on a tangent that probably doesn't need to be taken so far in your training.
I agree. Like easy strength is really, 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 really easy to combine with other things. Like you don't have to avoid doing something because you're trying to stay fresh for the next session. Like, you know, if you're tired, it's heavily adaptable, and when you feel good, you go. Like yeah, I absolutely agree that it's. I do think kind of like I, I do think that as part of coaches' journeys, like they should follow other people's programs, and then they should also, follow their own programs, because those are, absolutely vital learning experiences.
Mm.
But yeah, or certainly for me, there came a point where, like, I'm just not that excited about,
Mhm.
experimenting with myself anymore. I just, well,
Yeah. Yeah.
want to do something that's going to be effective and, keep me healthy and able to perform.
Yeah. I did German volume when I was 26, 10 sets of 10. I don't feel like doing that anymore. There's nothing in me that wants to experiment with something like German volume training anymore. It was all back then. I will
Uh,
say this from the Oh, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I did Smolov, like, amongst other things as
Mm,
well, which is brutal. Like, yeah, I wouldn't survive. I didn't survive then. I would survive for much less
oh, yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a lot to adapt to. Um with having a coach too, I'm such like an autonomous person. Like I have such a hard time staying on. Like if it's a program someone else wrote, I have such a hard time staying on it. Like even when I was younger, I would like the programs I would follow, the vertical jump programs I'd follow out of the back of like Slam magazine in the year 2000. I had to do something a little different a lot of times. There's always that. But I realize now, I use a dice a lot in my training. I know Dan's talked about that, and that's strong first and all that, and just to have the dice tell me what to do. Not, but I always try to make it a bandwidth. I usually have it like I usually run, for example, a common workout. I'll do 4 exercises. It might be like a short sprint, apply it with throw, and then a long sprint to kind of recover and reset. And it's not like it's not like, oh, short, you run 50 meters, 6, you run like an 800. It's usually like a bandwidth that's manageable. But sometimes I'll have my kids roll it and they're like, oh, let's get a 6. So dad has to run the farthest, haha, and that kind of thing. But it's so much better, honestly. I mean, I could just say I'm just going to run 200s at the end and that's that. But that's kind of boring and it's kind of nice having something that's not yourself telling you what to do, even if it's not a coach sometimes. That effect is really important. I've definitely gravitated that way.
The other thing that I find is, like, Tomasz, to give him a shout out, Tomasz,
Mhm.
you won't have a lot of Czech listeners, but Tomasz Rancik, he's a very, very talented coach and weightlifter in the Czech Republic. But, um, yeah, the other thing is that he tells me to do things I wouldn't do
Mhm.
because I don't like him. And I fully know that because I don't like him, that probably means I should be doing them. But I don't. But, you know, he gives me them to do. So, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff I'm doing in my training now that I either never did or haven't done for years, that, is definitely doing me good. Uh, but that, yeah, like if I'm writing my own program, I just go into the gym and do what I like doing, like.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Okay, so with Easy Strike quickly as well, I'm curious on your take on this because I want to start getting into some nuts and bolts. And I've heard someone say something like this, that uh, you have all the strength coaches with different recommendations. Like, I mean, stuff's all over the place. You got 1 by 20 and 5 by 5 and 3 sets of 10 and all this. And like Christian Thibodeau, I think one of his staples is like 4 sets of 8. Um, and I heard someone say that like an easy strength, like a 2 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 3 works best when you have like a base of having done the other stuff when you're younger. What do you think about that? Like, from a long-term perspective.
So I think kind of the thing to say, or to describe easy strength, as Dan wrote it, its original form. It's a 40 day or 40 workout program. So it's pick 5 exercises, always do those exercises every day, 10 reps per exercise, and and do it 40 times. So I don't think Dan ever kind of envisaged that program being taken as, okay, that's a long term athletic development model, like it is it's a 40 workout program. Uh, like, absolutely. So I think, like, we always have to be, very careful when we, um, take things, that we judge things within the context that they're being talked about, and so the context of that is okay. Well, this is a 2-month, 3-month program, whatever it is. Um, like absolutely, kind of. One of the things that I always talk a lot about in training is that we have okay. We often think about training just as being capacity building, whereas there's also skill building. Like kind of higher rep protocols in strength training are clearly much more capacity driven because they are a bigger stimulus to hypertrophy, whereas kind of lower rep programs are clearly more skill driven because there's less stimulus to hypertrophy and there's more kind of stimulus towards, okay, using what you have more efficiently. But there's a massive overlap between those two things. Like if you do 3 sets of 3, uh, you'll still get hypertrophy, and if you do 10 sets of 10, you still get better at squatting. So
Mhm.
so so there is overlap. Um, but yes, I would suspect that that yeah, like I would imagine that easy strength is more along the continuum to skill
Mm.
than a Christian Thibodeau 4 sets of 8, which, given his bias anyway, is clearly more hypertrophy focused,
Mm.
and definitely kind of the fundamental the fundamental structure of all kind of strength training periodization schemes is build tissue, refine tissue,
Mhm.
build tissue,
Yeah.
refine tissue.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it would make sense to me that yeah, like there is probably some points where you need to do work capacity or tissue building more than would be represented by the lower reps that you're seeing in easy strength.
Mm.
But with two caveats to that. One, that if you read Dan's writing, there's other places where he clearly does work
Yeah.
capacity stuff, so like rocking, dragging stuff, carrying stuff, like he does a lot of, he does a lot of other work capacity orientated things, which are probably great tissue building things. Um, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is just that, okay, the contention that, okay, you would need to have some more hypertrophy if it was going to, you know, in the long term with easy strength. Like I have some sympathy for that opinion, but I think you can do easy strength for a lot longer than people would think you can
Yeah. Oh,
before
yeah.
you've tapped out the gains that you can get with the tissue that you already have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and then the other thing with that is kind of like um yes, if you have bigger muscles, you've got more capacity, but that's not the only reason you're doing tissue stuff. You're also doing tissue stuff as a restorative thing. If you're doing easy strength, there's less need to have as much restorative things because you're not beating your body up in that training.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my 2 cents on that. But
Yeah. Yeah. I know one of the earliest pieces of capacity I read from Dan. It might have even been before Easy Strength that I'd heard of it. He talked about using a set of 20 or maybe a couple sets of 20 with high school athletes for their capacity phase. At that point, I was like 20, like I don't think I'd heard about 1x20 or anything like that. So, yeah, clearly there's more to that. But I do think about that in the sense of, there's an interesting book that no one knows exactly who wrote it. This DB Hammer, best training book ever. And the two main constructs are either capacity building, like a longer duration bracket, or a short. And then you can use that in strength modalities. You can use it in speed. And I find, for me, I prefer. It's like if you have to pick what parts of your program are going to be simple or complex, I'll make all the speed stuff a little more complicated. I prefer the strength stuff just being a smaller, easier rotation for the most part. Just because if I get carried away with too many things, either in my own training or writing programs, it's just too many things. It makes me think about even I want to. It makes me also want to get Bondarchuk's, like some of Bondarchuk's long term stuff out, because easy strength and Pavel's. It reminds you of Bondarchuk. Like, here's a lift, you do it every day. It's not the intensity; it's just the fact that you did this every day. And you also threw the shot, every day, and you also did a special strength every day, and you also did capacity building every day. And over time, it's just going to build your body in a way that fits the skill you're trying to do as well. So I definitely see a lot of carryovers there. But yeah, I know even in doing like the GPP work, like sandbag carries up and down my hill and like loaded carries, you do that stuff and your desire to be like, oh yeah, I got to hit some sets of 12 in the gym. I don't know. I'm like, I'm good. I feel pretty good doing this, getting the capacity with the more human stuff, really. Um, it's definitely a multifactorial thing for sure.
I couldn't agree more. And like, it is context, isn't it? I think kind of like Dan has written other easy strength programs that have different goals. I think kind of, my feeling that it is that, you know, the sort of, but a lot of Dan's writing is often now for general health, like to do with how people age and things, and that, then that's, fantastic advice for that. But yeah, like I also would say that kind of it's pretty clear in Dan's writing that he doesn't say that strength training is the only thing that you're doing. Like like he's advocating for you to do other things, and those like those fill some of those other gaps. Like it's not simply resistance training, and so kind of for me, where when I was doing easy strength, and I was doing it for a long time actually. Even having had the discussion of it's only a
Sure.
40-day program, I did it for way longer than that.
Oh yeah, same,
Um,
same.
and but like the thing that's a staple in the way I train is like I do Tai Chi every day.
Mm,
Or not actually Tai Chi, like Tai Chi conditioning. Um, but I hold static postures for a long time. I do a lot of reps I do a lot of body weight reps of things. So kind of for me, kind of that ticks the box for kind of doing tissue stuff, doing,
mm.
I mean, it's not hypertrophy, but kind of, like if you were like in a Nassim Taleb kind of like barbell thing, like, the easy strength was doing the intense end, and,
Yeah.
the Tai Chi is doing the other end, and I don't
Mm.
do a lot in the middle. Um, I'm not advocating that's the only way to train, but that's certainly the structure of how I train.
Yeah. Yeah. The Tai Chi stuff is interesting because it makes me think of like long isometric holds. I was just having a conversation with Kevin Secures about martial arts, about Russian sistema, the long holds throughout Russian, like the super slows in Russian training, and Jay Schrader's extreme isos. And, that's definitely a pull for most, even beyond weightlifting, I feel like in many ways. Sit still and hold it for a long time. And then on the other hand, you have move fast and varied in sport. Um, do you have any take on some of those longer holds, like a long horse stance? I don't know if like the horse stance is like a long horse stance is a Tai Chi or
Yeah.
martial art thing, but any thought on
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I mean that's part of what I do daily.
Yeah.
So kind of like I do something called Naigon, which is a bit like Qigong but harder.
Hmm.
Uh, like sometimes people call it iron shirt conditioning, or
Oh
like
yeah.
it's but yeah, like it's within that there are holding horse stance for minutes, and yeah, like like that's humbling for everyone, and
Mm.
I couldn't do that when I started doing it,
Yeah.
and you take pretty much my experience of doing it with other people is you take someone who hasn't done that before and
Oh.
they can't hold horse stance for very long,
Mm-mm.
um, and but you learn it like equally it's interesting kind of. Some of the other static postures, like really when I started doing them, really worked my back really hard. Like and all the kind of like supporting musculature of your shoulder on your back that we train with things was just getting brutalized by
Man.
holding, these static postures. And um, and then there's lots of reps, and then there's other things which are quite clever, sort of kind of twisting things,
Yeah.
like, which are like lots of twisting actually, because it's got, it's very martial, obviously. But, so that it's coordination and, core stability, like I use the term reluctantly, but, um, I mean, I try and do that every day, and there's two sessions that alternate. So one takes about 30 minutes, one takes about 40 minutes, and I try and do them every day, the and I've been doing that for years and years and years and years. And the reason why I try and do that every day is I feel good when I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And like my, you know, my body feels better than before I was doing it. Like my knees used to hurt more as a, you know, early 30s person before I started doing that than they do now as a late 40s person. And there's other reasons for that as well. Like I don't play basketball or volleyball at the moment,
Sure.
which is a big factor in your knees hurting, of course. But um, yeah, the structural integrity of my body, my work capacity, um, my robustness is really high, and I do attribute a lot of that to that activity.
Yeah. If you were to take, I think, yeah, 30 minutes, if you ask athletes to do 30 minutes of that, that's quite a bit. But how much of that would you put into, like, let's just say a standard sports performance program, like any static holds, like horse stance, lunge holds, twisting versions? Does any of that make its way into the programs that you write for athletes, or how you consider that? Do you feel that applicable?
Um, I mean, I don't write programs anymore,
Ah,
to be honest. So I haven't I haven't addressed that question. Like it is a big expense of time,
yeah,
uh, you
it
know,
can be a long time. That's for sure.
and you like given my goals and the effects that I've seen it on me, like it's yeah, like I pay that time gratefully. But kind of depending on what someone else's goals are, it may or may not be appropriate. Um,
Mm,
it's also somewhere where kind of like I've over the course of many years have become a more and more esoteric, which turns up in it's starting to turn up a little bit in my training writing. It turns up a lot more in the other writing that I do. But to kind of like go from the tried and tested, uh, for my or to do the esoteric things with myself is fine. To take that, into the world to do with other people and to do something that's a little bit off the wall and maybe less tried and tested,
mhm,
certainly in the Western context, because
sure.
of course Tai Chi is very tried and tested in a different context. Is quite a big leap, and it's not, um, like it's not, yeah, not something where I'm in a professional context challenged to do anyway. Um, but I do believe in it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that's interesting in Tai Chi, for what it's worth, um, is, and this goes to the motor learning conversation, and is kind of one of the big problems that I perceive that people have when they are trying to learn to weightlift or in their training generally, especially if they're self-coached or if they're not well coached, is that they just try and think their way through things far too much.
Mm, yes.
Uh, so kind of, and the like you can see people someone who's trying to learn how to weightlift, and they've clearly read a lot about it and they've thought about it a lot and they understand what they're trying to do and they understand the positions their bodies are meant to go through, and so they go through those positions very slowly and think their way through it. And I think there's an assumption there that at some point it's just going to click and then
Mhm,
they're going to be able to do it. And that's not the case. Like it's not going to happen. Like
mm,
like you don't rehearse slowly over and over again and it suddenly magically become ballistic. Like if you want to be good at a ballistic movement, you have to move ballistically
mhm,
pretty much from the outset. So certainly once you are able to do it safely, and then you refine it by just trying to catch what happened and do it better the next time. Uh, Tai Chi is clearly a very different philosophy to that, because Tai Chi is a philosophy of moving through things really, really slowly and trying to learn something about them in moving slowly. So on the surface, it seems kind of like absolutely diametrically opposed to kind of how I would work with people. Like, what people don't typically don't understand about Tai Chi is what you see old people doing in the park is just a part of the Tai Chi training system. And if you train Tai Chi as a martial art, it's actually very, very clever and nicely put together, because you have this slow moving bit. You also have some very controlled rehearsals of things. You do things, you know, dynamically drill things, and you spar. So like it does have all of the components of a normal martial art,
Mhm.
and those components are necessary to learn to be able to fight. Like people always take the piss out of Tai Chi because they're kind of like, well, how are you going to learn to be lethal doing this? Or you're not,
Mm.
but it is a complement to you know kind of understanding movement. Um, but
Yeah.
again, like I do believe in that. But kind of if I'm teaching people how to weight lift, I don't slow them down. Like
Yeah.
I do the ballistic bit.
Yeah. It is one of those things where, yeah, I think the whole theme of this podcast is, oh, what intellectual nuggets, have I personally taken away, and people have listened and all those things. But, you get in the middle of a 10-minute horse stance, and there's not really a whole lot of intellectual necessarily. You're not thinking, oh man, what's my blood lactate level, and what part of this is my own like physical, my own mental perception of pain, and how much do my muscles. I don't think that's really, necessarily the thing. It's just more experiencing it. And I think if anything, sometimes those experiential items, not to say just use fatigue as the only weapon there. I think it's one of them,
But
definitely not the only one.
it's like the concept of old man strength, or farmhand strength. Like if you get someone who works on a farm for 40 years, like they might not be that muscular.
Mhm.
Like they'll have thick hands, thick forearms, but like they're not necessarily going to be built like a bodybuilder, but they will be strong.
Mhm.
They will have work capacity for days. Like, and how do you describe the adaptations that they went through to get to that in terms of
Mhm.
traditional sports science? Like, you can't. Like, they didn't do an hour, like, have a stress response and then take 48 hours of recovery, and then put another one on top of it. Like, like they just haven't. They've built a huge amount of capacity in a way that it is very, very hard actually to describe within kind of the language of sports science, but it's there. And I think that, like, the sort of the wisdom of the traditional martial arts is to build. It's not the same sort of strength, but this kind of wiry, functional strength,
Mhm.
like without a huge amount of mass behind it, but just people who you can't move, and kind of within like traditional martial arts and things, or well, those sorts of things are built with these traditional practices of sitting in horse stance forever, carrying water up steps, or or
Yep.
whatever it is. We can laugh about it, but like it's not punishment. Like, it's
Yeah.
conditioning. Um, I mean, like in Tai Chi, like the you know the kind of or in our system of Tai Chi, the kind of most traditional conditioning, apart like as pure cardiovascular conditioning, is super interesting. It's doing rolls,
Mm.
so doing
Oh,
forward roll forwards, and then
yeah.
then turning around and doing forward roll back. I forgot what the numbers are for it, but it's something like um, like you do if you can do like 40 rolls in 90 seconds. I'll be getting it completely
Mm.
wrong, because and do 4 sets of that, then you're in shape to go and have a fight. Yeah, it's a very interesting thing because it's very disorientating. Like
Yeah.
I never managed to train with it because it just makes me feel sick, and I have
Mm,
never pushed through that, which is my weakness. Like it's very clearly an excuse. Um, but like it's not just that it's disorientating, but like also it is really really hard work. Like like it's a
mhm.
very tiring thing to do from a cardiovascular standpoint. Uh, like it's a really interesting conditioning tool, which you won't see anyone doing ever. Like,
Yeah.
um, but I'm sure works, or achieves an adaptation for that's useful for a particular task.
Yeah. You mentioned esoteric. And one of the things I've been thinking about a little bit and just kind of the balance makes the barbell of sorts of the method. But like on one end, you have, all right, I'm going to categorize training in all these different ways, all the lifting brackets and eccentrics and concentrics and different isometrics, and then you have intensive plyos and extensive plyos, this, that, the other thing. And then the other end, I was thinking about something that Carl Jung had talked about with symbols, and it was basically like if you dissect the symbol too much and you try to intellectualize it, you actually ruin kind of the magic of the symbol. And and it's like in some sense there's the pragmatic point of coaching where it's just like your program is the program, and you almost don't want athletes to, I mean, you want them to intellectually participate, and some always do more than others. And I always appreciate athletes who want to know about the program, but in some sense, there is that just like the whole package, like the role. Can you dissect the role and why it's awesome? Like it was last year I was down in Florida, and I met up with Alex Lee, he's a chiropractor and strength coach down there. He's been on this podcast and talking about isometric long holds, funny enough. And we constructed a workout together where it was like ISO hold for a minute. I think it was we did this together. He picked an ISO hold, we did it for a minute, and I said, "Oh, we're going to do a fun thing for a minute." And the fun thing was rolls, as you were describing, for a decent part of that for a minute. He had a mat dive rolling, and we ended up, Anyways, long story short is he had told me his next day his HRV score was about the best it had been in a very long period of time. And part of that's it's the social and you're meeting with a friend and training, but I think there's something just really cool about some of those like engaged 3D, like there's with the ground. There's just something that feels very good about that. I use rolling in my own programming. I just call it Roll Explore. You could say it's when I'm being lazy with programming on a recovery day, but I'll say Roll Explore 10 minutes, and just roll. It could be dive rolls, it could be long axis, and I love it. Yeah, I'm not sure how you could really to start to pick apart all the pieces as to why it's awesome might be a little challenging, but um, yeah, I
So, like, I mean, I agree. Like like you don't need to if it works necessarily. The thing with kind of like what we approach training, within the context that we grew up and that we studied, which is that we try and understand it using the tools that we have. Um, and that's fine and understandable. Like the problem comes when we don't respect other contexts and other approaches to training and other tools that people have developed to use things, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at the traditional martial arts, uh, like they have a very, very long history of trying to improve people's performance.
mm,
Like, and the tools that they've, like, I mean, we still know that kind of, like in all honesty, a large part of our coaching, like it is informed by some of the theories that we have, but it's still a large part is informed by, what our mentors and our coaches did, and what we've seen to work. And the, our training approaches have developed from that. Like that's exactly the same way that these training approaches will have been developed 400, 500 years ago in China or Japan. And, and, the lineage and the history of these as a philosophy of training, I would suggest is longer and
mhm.
richer and more mature than the lineage of the training approaches that we have now, which date back to I like it depends how bold you want to be in tracing it back, but um, and I'm not a historian of strength, so I'm sure someone will call in and say that no, like Western. But yeah, like if you're talking about kind of a training system like Tai Chi, which yeah, like traces its history back to a mythical figure, but equally, you can trace its lineage back through 200 years of real historical figures. Like that's 200 years of people training, trying things out, observing what worked, observing what made them better, and 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 kind of selecting those things that work, and doing so with the same yardstick that we use today.
Mm.
So just because they didn't have science doesn't mean that they didn't have good judgment for it. Of course they did.
Mhm.
Um, so kind of there's an immense amount of richness in these programs, and some of the things that it's hard to defend, with our tools and methodologies, don't mean that they don't work. Uh, like for me, kind of, yeah, the Tai Chi system I train within is a very, very complete and clever system. Like and it's so elegant. Uh, like it's not a Western approach to training. Uh, and yeah, taking one or two things in isolation, you might go like, well, that's just stupid. But uh, there's been many, many great fighters created by in training in this way.
Yeah. Makes me think training now a little bit to some extent. I think about like AI especially, how some people say, I mean, I think you can leverage AI to help leverage creativity if you use it well, but I also think it can just give you a lot of pretty good information that's all kind of the same, like, and so training almost becomes more the same than it becomes unique and creative truly. And I think about even like Herschel Walker, like doing tons of sit-ups and push-ups and chasing trains. We talk about intention. How do you cultivate intention in sprinting? Chase the train and want to be good. Like who? No one does that. Who does it anymore? Like, is that die out or like the Great Gamma with like his hundreds of squats or whatever? Which I don't. And some of that stuff, it's like, and then I think everyone tried to copy it, but it worked for him obviously better than other people. And then, but another one I was thinking about was we talk about isometrics a lot, and I have a book. I've referenced it all the time, probably too much, but it's the Spiritual Journey of Joseph Greenstein, or The Mighty Atom, the strong man who like bent horseshoes and stuff, and into his 70s and 80s, I even think, which is so crazy. I have like a little teeny horseshoe someone gave me because they saw I have a picture of the Mighty Atom on my wall, and I'm trying to bend this little teeny thing. It's not even a horseshoe. It's like a miniature, and I'm like, how did this guy do this? And when he was younger, he was a wrestler and trained in jujitsu. He was like a longshoreman, and he ended up in Japan, and he learned from jujitsu over there, all this stuff. And he went to India, I think, even too. And there was this wrestler in India that was just blew away everybody. And he asked him about his training, and the guy's like, "Yeah, I wrestle a tree in the morning because if you can wrestle a tree, a man is easy." I'm thinking isometrics, but it's more that's almost like the symbol. It's like because I mean, if you tell the young wrestlers to wrestle a tree, they're like, wait, what? Like, and the intention, who knows what the intention is? Like, it's like there's just a blend of so many pieces of someone's physiology you put into that type of thing. And it actually goes beyond what I think you can directly prescribe. Yeah. And again, it's good to, I mean, I love my categories. I wouldn't be the coach I am without them. But I just love looking at that other side of things too, because sometimes it almost gets me out of sometimes that over category land. Or like I write programs. I write a lot of programs every week, so sometimes I just think about those things on the other end of it all. With that and I agree with you. Those long practices. Back to your point, bring us back into a typical training cycle. I even think about we have high velocity training to make it simple, and then slower strength training that's health and robustness and physiological adaptation. But then I think people don't talk about, I do think like some category of slow training, but maybe it could be expanded like awareness, visualization. I think it's more because it's a little more esoteric. It almost seems like there's more room for something like that. But it does strike me that I think every high level athlete has that kind of thing in their system on some level. But saying do a horse stance for 10 minutes probably isn't going to do it for a lot of people. It's there's other items of that super slow or awareness cultivation or visualization axis that I think is important, but maybe it's just harder to describe.
Yeah. And it's also kind of like, what's the purpose of these things? I mean, the what you're seeking in, in Tai Chi when you're doing things slowly, or you're doing, holding positions, is to find the strongest position that you can. So it's like it's not just not just holding this position for no reason. Like I'm actively, it, it, you know, non-judgmentally watching
Mhm,
what I'm doing, and
mhm.
trying to find the biomechanics that's most effective. Um, that's part of it. Um, I mean, it's a little bit kind of something I do quite a bit when I teach weightlifting and then talk about it. For instance, is like when I teach people to weightlift, like I use a kind of constraints based approach to that. So this is into motor learning. So kind of, you know, and again, trying to stop people from thinking. Like just give them, I'm just giving them the cue to jump all the time. So it's something they know how to do, and then I'm trying to manipulate the environment so it turns into looking like weightlifting. Um, like one of the constraints that I use is getting people tired.
Hmm,
And like you clearly have to be careful with that,
yes.
because like there's some injury risk, if you're trying to get someone to do too much when they're tired. At the same time, it is a wonderful constraint to stop people thinking,
Mm,
because they can't process anymore. Like, and it's a wonderful constraint to make the body let go.
yes.
Like, okay, I'm just too tired to try and control this anymore. I'll just let it happen. And which again is something that I think is often hard for people to let go when they're learning to weightlift. Um, like where I kind of got comfortable with that as a constraint, or as an approach to motor learning, which feels very counterintuitive for me, actually, because I'm like lots of other people. Like I don't want to. I want to control what I'm doing. I don't want to look
Mhm,
stupid, and I want to think about it and try and do it properly. Like which doesn't work. But where the penny dropped for me was like I used to go and get coached in Thai boxing by a Thai guy who lives in Prague. So like very very a very very traditional approach to Muay Thai. Um, like and like as if you follow martial arts, like they just keep kicking stuff.
mhm,
Like just keep doing the same kick over and over again, and
mm,
and like from the outside, it might look silly, or it might be conditioning, but I think that it is mindfully, or in the better coaches, or the people who've developed those systems, like they're mindfully, manipulating, uh, the environment, using fatigue as a constraint. Like, okay, like once you've done your 40th roundhouse kick, like, okay, you're not worrying about trying to do it right anymore. Like, and unlike the guys just screaming at you to smack to kick the
mhm,
thing harder, like all you're trying to do is get your leg off the ground. And all that's left is for your nervous system to find the most efficient way to do that. And like your mind gets out of the way because you're
mhm.
too tired. But like, and again, it's kind of, one of these things where, okay, well, what's the point of sitting in a 10-minute horse stance? Well, it's not just that. Like, there's something else going on. Like, what's the point of kicking something for 2 minutes? Like with it, well, like it's not just about that. Like,
Yeah.
there is some wisdom, you know, in the better use of that. In that this is a way to where we can learn something, which is very different to kind of the Western approach, which is you can't learn anything unless it's high quality.
Mm,
And you've got, you're fresh enough to do it perfectly.
yeah. Yeah, I agree, especially too, like, speed and power is always a big topic on this show, and when you think speed, it's like, yeah, it's gotta be fresh, it's gotta be perfect technique. I mean, and so many skills. Yeah, perfect technique, that was perfect technique. That term drives me nuts, actually. I probably catch myself saying perfect a few times a year, though, so it might drive me nuts, but occasionally I'm like, "Wait, I just said that in practice." So, anyways, I, but what really got on my radar to that fatigue, well, a couple things. One was working with a swim coach who was using it. He was doing technical sessions. He was like a technique consultant, and I saw him working with swimmers, and he actually had them. He called it like a low puff. Like he actually wanted the aerobic system working not max, but like some level to kind of take that conscious, like overthinking brain out of it. That was one of his tools, and that was the first time I had really seen that used with that intention behind it. And I think too, even with like speed and power, I mean, so much of it, like if you just go and you run 100% full rest, do it the same way, 100% full rest. I mean, there's only so far that will get you just in and of itself. There needs to be some sort of differential learning brought in at some point, ideally. And I mean, I'm not saying to go slog like 10 400s if you're a sprinter. I don't think that's a good idea. But I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, and as to your point, I've grown to value that mild to medium level of fatigue strategically, just to, yeah, because you're not strategizing so much at that point, really. You know, you're just kind of noticing. Honestly, if anything, I think after you're done in a while, you just start noticing. It's like, oh yeah, well, my body did do that. That was pretty cool. Like that's always the best versus, yeah, I'm going to do this and it's going to work like this and this will get me faster, throw the thing farther, like that kind of idea. And I was even thinking about Dan John's machine gun. Speaking of Dan John, machine gun throws, where it's like discus, you like hand someone a discus, throw this one, hand him a discus, throw this one. Because usually those single shot things, you don't ever get that experience where you kind of just turn your brain off and just do it. So yeah, I
Yeah,
think
like
that's such an underrated element of learning and training.
I mean, the machine gun thing is a great example
Yeah, yeah.
because, like if you're always walking out, picking up your implement, walking back with it again, like you're definitely going to think about it every time before you
Mhm.
throw it. And, again, I mean, like sprinting is an interesting one way, to talk about fatigue because clearly, yeah, like, we don't, you do need to be able to express, like, you don't want to be moving slowly too much
Yeah.
and trading that. Like the place to, and I'm not a sprint coach and I've not trained people to sprint, but the place to me where it seems like the kind of fatigue might be an interesting place to learn lessons is just learning how to relax.
Yes.
Like like if you're always fresh and trying hard, like that's not really conducive to to having relaxation. Whereas if you're battered,
Yeah.
like you're gonna stop trying to like, you know, get it right. Like like you can just like the fatigue can force relaxation, and it seems to me that that's somewhere, and the fatigue, and like the fatigue amplifies the negative part of not being relaxed. So it seems to me as a learning, like it's clearly not an argument for always being fatigued when you train, but as a learning environment, which is what constraints-based learning is, to set up an environment where you use fatigue to kind of let an athlete experience relaxation on, under effort and under speed, and then hope that they can then take that into more quality work would be, an approach which, you know, purely from a, me bullshitting theoretical point
Sure.
of view would be, yeah, like it seems to me like it has potential.
Yeah, just pragmatically or anecdotally, I found that almost the opposite of, yeah, and obviously you can't slow if you want to be fast, but like the opposite of like, hey, we're gonna go out run in 10-meter flies or 30 meters and full rest recovery and run it again is like an every minute on the minute, like 20-meter sled. Still pretty fast. It's not like you're not in survival mode, but there's something about that where the aerobic system's coming up a little bit. You're kind of in this more of a like a flowing state where it's not your fastest, but you start to feel different things. There's a capacity behind the specific pathways. You're more relaxed generally in some level. Um, I even think about that. I like rock climbing in the winter and like the top rope or the big wall climbs, like 30 feet. I like because I'm a little bigger than a lot of the climbers there, and man, I my forearms just get pumped out like crazy about 20 feet up on a lot of the harder ones. And but it was funny the other day. I got a climb. I had just my forearms just kept getting crushed on the week before, and I don't know how I climbed it. I'm like, did I just take advantage of the rest better? Was I in better shape? Like, did my body just subconsciously move better? I don't know, but I climbed it, and but it's just to me, it's kind of fun. I almost would rather succeed like that sometimes than oh, I did this one move better. Like, and I intellectually figured that one out. I like the things that it's not just that intellectual. And I don't think it ever is. It's everything. You know, it's like the little subconscious processes, maybe the little fatigue resiliencies. So, um, yeah, I'm sure lots of that
Yeah.
type of item in your book too. I was getting into that. One of the questions I had or the series was, an emergence and how do skills emerge um, yeah, so I feel like we're there. I wanted to talk about creative force development. I feel like we just kind of skipped that part. I was like, oh yeah, I want to talk about impulse. Impulse is great, but it seems like we've naturally kind of gravitated towards that skill and emergence piece of it, which I love. I mean, that's the thing I love talking about these days.
Yeah, and like that's and it comes back to motor control, and that's definitely you know that definitely had the most important part of how I view development occurring now. It's kind of like you don't do it to an athlete, like they don't do it then to themselves. Like that we're a system that's interacting with each other. Like coach, athlete, and within context, and some behaviors arise out of that, like and emerge, and kind of you know, it, if you view training in that sort of way, it's not like I push this button and it causes this, but rather like we think we know what we want to appear, like let's try and set this up in the in a way that's conducive to that, but we're not in control.
Yeah.
If we've got some good experience, we can, predict with some confidence what might happen. But equally, yeah, like it's a dynamic, evolving system. And very much, yeah, the way I view training is in those terms. It's kind of like, okay, well, within this, system of which I'm a part, like what can I do which might nudge us all in the direction that we want to be moving, but also knowing that recognizing that the other part, the main part of the system that we're focused on, the athlete, is highly tractable to change.
Hmm.
Like it will change. They will change based on what's happening. So it's not like it's not that hard for things to move, because they will, because that's what the body does. Um, uh, we just have to have a bit more, or it helps to have more understanding of what that process is, and a little bit of more humility about what we're actually in control of and not.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I
Yeah,
think understanding that and like that little bit of a surrender piece, like you mentioned, like
yeah,
that little fatigue endurance. Like, I mean, obviously you can go big if you want on that stuff, but for me, even stuff like just speed endurance, where you're doing like a tough like 300-meter sprint if you're a track athlete, or it's kind of that
yes,
range where it's still fast, but it's hard. There is that level of surrender, like just to the rhythm of the body and to the task constraint and to get it done versus trying to control every little piece. The more you get into some of those kind of deeper embodied pieces, it's just harder to control stuff. I find that with rock climbing all the time too. That's part of the reason I like it. You have to kind of almost, you mentioned esoteric, like be one with the wall and just surrender to like being tired. And I don't know, it is. I think you could find that in anything if you really want to. But one of the things I always like about training too is like, especially I find especially in the jumps, but really anything is so often like that best effort, it feels effortless. Like when a PR surprises you, like, oh, that felt so easy. I can't believe I just PR'd. Like that's always like the thing. Like that's the thing we want. Like, and-
that's sorry. That's exactly that. That's exactly it. Like like and to put it in, you know, formal sports science terms, but like like we want to be in flow. Like, but but you can't make yourself be in flow, and trying to make yourself be in flow is absolutely not going to get you to flow. So the word that you used, which absolutely I believe is that you surrender.
Mm,
Like it's flow is something that's going to emerge out of a system when you're not trying to do to make it. So
mhm.
kind of like, I mean, if you're talking about sprinting, that's why kind of like trying too hard. Well, like it's not just that you need to be relaxed. like, of course you need to be relaxed to be able to switch things on and off quickly, like you need to be able to, and, yada, yada. But, more profoundly, like until you relax and let things happen, you won't get into flow. And until you get into flow, you're unlikely to be showing mastery or doing PBs, etc. So kind of, like absolutely very much kind of, I think, a change of mindset from, I'm controlling this to I'm seeing what's going to happen. It,
Mm.
it, it is conducive to flow arising. And with that come, yeah, the PBs and like, what you're, saying about, okay, that PBs have felt easy again. If we come back to Dan John, it's something that, like that, the PB throw feels like an 80% throw, doesn't it? Or a 90% throw. It never your PB never felt like 100%
Yeah.
throw. Like, and again, I think like this machine gun approach you were talking about it, like, and all these things are that it's, get, like ultimately, although we do use our mind to learn stuff, when it comes to performance, we need to learn to not using our mind. Like, even in things that are highly cognitive, kind of like, playing football, playing basketball, like if you're trying to think about what you're going to do, you're
Hmm.
going to be far too slow. Like
Oh, yeah.
ultimately, like your mind is, and it's the same with Tai Chi and doing things slowly. Like all of these things are part of maybe part of the learning process, but the performance just has to emerge and happen without you intervening in it. So ultimately a big part of training has to recognize that and rehearse that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like one of the things, I think this cue has kind of gone in and out a little bit of my system, but it's definitely been back. And I know Dan's talked about it, like, I mean, as range
Yeah.
throwing or basically finishing a session with, you put a target, 30 feet less than whatever you threw and just try to hit it as easy as possible. I remember
Yeah.
the first time I tried that with high jump, I was like, ooh, this is awesome. Definitely been missing this one. I'm sure you could do a weightlifting, especially more skilled type pieces. Probably doesn't help as much to do with arm curls or something, but suppose you could. But I mean, I've been a lot of time, like recently, like sprint workouts. We'll finish the last sprint. Just I'll be like, hey, hit the same time you just did, but I want you to make it look like the easiest thing in the world. Show me the easiest way you can possibly do that. Like that's the cue. It's not do this or that or the other thing, or same thing with like high jump. And that's such a, I don't know. There's internal and external cues. I guess that's an analogy, but I just love that, like that, having that in the rotation. I just think it's powerful and it does speak to, what you were
Yeah.
saying.
I think there's, genius in that. Um, and, if we're kind of again coming full circle, I think that that's one of the things that's well embedded within the Easy Strength program.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of like, well, come back, it's not kind of, okay, could you do it? Like add something. It's like, well, come back and do the same thing and make it easier again.
Yeah.
Like I think there's or, make it easy again when you're tired, like, or like, um, uh, uh, I don't think that kind of, like we're not really, like we're not very well set up for recognizing improvement in just terms of like, okay, well, this was easier than it
Mm.
was before. Whereas that is improvement. I mean, in terms of kind of like the stuff Steve Magnus talks about a lot, of kind of raising the floor, not just the ceiling,
Mm.
like making the same workout easier is
Yeah.
raising the floor. And again, is yeah, like it is the underlooked part of the training strategy.
Yeah. It's kind of like what you said, Dan, about like, build capacity, express capacity, or something like, it was a phrase you used right at the beginning. Um, and it is kind of like, it's almost like the masculine always wants to, which we need that vitally in training. It always wants to push the ceiling, whereas the feminine kind of brings up the floor, I feel. And it is like, I don't know. I think that the mixing of both, there's always the two realms of things, but I think we tend to want to find the instructions that push or the emphasis that pushes versus the thing that kind of solidifies and kind of makes things just feel a little bit easier. And I know when things feel easier, it definitely, it's also like builds your confidence. it reinforces kind of your self perception of your athletic abilities, and some of these things it even works into like my dad life. Like my son, he doesn't like math very much, and he's doing these problems, and I'm like, I could like motivate him. I'm like, just finish him, and you'll get a prize, or I don't know, you can do the next thing. But I'm like, just pretend you're the best kid in the school in math for like 5 minutes. Just pretend. And honestly, that works so well. Like just like bam, bam, bam. And then maybe that was just what was needed for the time and that won't work anymore later. But it's interesting to think about trying to give things that let you kind of surrender and make it easy versus always trying to feel like you're forcing something. Uh,
It's really interesting that like you characterized kind of the masculine and the feminine, which is one of the things that I try and avoid. I very uh, firmly try and avoid saying, but but I would describe in terms of yin and yang. But
sure.
yin is always associated with the feminine and yang with the masculine.
Mhm.
Um, uh, and one of the things I learned, if we go back to a conversation from the start, one of the things I learned when I was writing this most recent book, which I didn't know that I knew, um, was how much of training is about, that dynamic interplay of opposites. Yeah, everywhere I looked when I came to this, like when I really started looking at training, wa- w- was I saw, well, like there is, there's two sides, and one emerges out of the other, and the other emerges out of the other. In a very yin yang
Yeah.
esoteric way. So the example of that we've talked about already is kind of like, well, yeah, training is always accumulation and intensification. Build, sharpen, uh, you know, build, build, refine, like whatever it is. But like, you can't sharpen if you don't have something.
Yes.
Equally, you can't build more unless like and and there's just loads and loads of pairs in that wherever you kind of look in the training literature. Such that kind of like the way that this new book is framed at the outset was
Mm.
kind of like, yeah, like it's not an explicit thread that runs through the book, but like, this is about the yin and yang of training. Like, training is finding the rhythm, and the rhythm is the pull of those two opposites. Like, um, like, and where like that's as much as to be, for me, kind of a fundamental training principle. And where you go wrong is if you just lean, you don't understand that the one is the source of the other, like, and that you need to be doing both.
Yeah. You said you didn't want to get too esoteric. It's like the
Yeah,
waves of the ocean,
sorry.
man. Just the waves
It's
of
a
the
di it merged it. It merged. It was emergent behavior of our system. So,
Yeah, yeah. I love the idea of, I think that's a good visual, maybe something good to close on is like the sculpture. And it's like if you're too young, but yeah, I will probably mispronounce it. I apologize. You're too young, it's just a big blocky sculpture that just doesn't look very good. But if you're too yin and it's all like all technique and all, that all fluidity and all that, then you might not have the block to chip from. So yeah, I love that illustration of having both. And I do think that it's not one of there, it's the balance of the two. And just being sure that you have them, because I think people oftentimes will look negatively on one of it. Maybe they'll look on, a training that's too intensive or too macho or too much young, or oh, that's just all fluidy, like bashful, like, whatever. That's too yin. And yeah, to have some sort of meaningful balance, I think is always well needed.
yeah, and I think kind of, yeah, absolutely. And then the thing that I think probably is less well known about that, what that yin yang sign kind of represents, is kind of, the little white dot in the black bit, represents the black can't exist without the white. Like
Mhm. Yep.
the black emerges from the white, and similarly the white emerges from the black, and so it's not even that, about having balance and having both. It's about a recognition that this can't exist without this.
Yeah.
And yeah, like, you can't have an edge without having built capacity. Like
Yes.
like and it's very easy to look at approaches to training, for instance, that miss that. Like that, all they do is try and sharpen an edge,
Yep.
which
Yep.
there's a Tai Chi saying, which is, if you keep sharpening a knife, it goes blunt.
Yes. Isn't that the Tao Te Ching or something in there? Or I don't know. That is such a good quote though.
Mm.
But yes, awesome. So let's finish up here, Dan. I think you had this quote. I wrote it in my notes, so I think you wrote it. But you said the coach's role is not to impose perfection, but to create an environment where that can emerge. Probably a
Yeah.
broad question to finish, but can you just tell me some practical takeaways? So you have a room of coaches in front of you, and you're describing, hey, 5 minutes. These are some key pillars to your program to lay that out. I know we've been talking about it too, but if you were to reframe it in a group of coaches and talk about what it means to create that environment where perfection can emerge versus imposing it, what would you say?
Wow. I was all relaxed, and then at the end you drop that bombshell on me.
I built you up the whole time. Sorry.
Yeah. Um, I mean, we've talked about, that quite a lot of, okay, well, why you don't, why we don't impose on, or why imposing on people it isn't kind of a productive way to think about the training process. I mean, I just there needs to be a recognition when we're training athletes that kind of you don't get the job done in one session.
Hmm.
Like like the most heroic session that you can do is still going to make a tiny change in the adaptation of an athlete, unless we're talking about a beginner. But in which case that you can have a massive change, but that if you stop, it was going to disappear instantly as well. Um, so kind of that's the key argument why consistency is so important. It is because all we can ever do is make infinitesimal changes. So we need to make loads of those. Uh, it then also leads to kind of, well, why like you can't really ever say that, yeah, I'm driving the athlete to where I want to go, because like like you're taking lots and lots of tiny steps. Each of those has, error involved in them, but also the stimuli that you're giving to the athlete, if you're lucky, for 2 hours out of 22 every day. And if
Mm.
you're super lucky, they're, you know, laying a great environment for those stimuli to kind of bed down. Uh, but they're bombarded by a bunch of other stimuli as well. So all you can possibly say is that, okay, there's, you're part of this system that you're trying to help something to change towards a shared goal of where you want to get to, and all you're doing is, nudging and seeing what the result is, and equally a recognition there that your nudge isn't what makes is the stimulus to the change, but what actually does the changing is the athlete's body.
Hmm.
Like like I give a stimulus, but how my body responds to that is its choice.
Yes.
So like there is, we have no control over this thing. Like we're in conversation, with our own body if we're training ourselves, or with our athlete's body. Like, and that has to be a conversation that is sustained for a long time and occurs frequently. And within that conversation, we, you know, need to be very clear in the questions we're asking. But more importantly, we have to be very, very sensitive to the answers that we're getting back, and be very, very good at changing our next question in response to the answer that we get. if you view then the training in that way as, okay, well, we're a dynamic system, where we're just nudging and nudging and nudging, and then and that we have no control over what we're doing, that allows you to be much more responsive and understanding of what's happening, and that will hopefully allow you to cooperate with the body that you're trying to kind of encourage to come with you to where you see to do what it is, because without that body agreeing to do with it, nothing's going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you brought up that point of, I think a lot of times the coach will think, I see this in track too, and I see it myself, is we'll say something to an athlete's doing, a field event, and you say, "Hey, you should change this," and they did it, and maybe it was a chance where an instance where they changed it and it got better, because a lot of times I'll say, "Hey, try this," and it gets worse. So, but those times it gets better. Oh, I told the athlete to do this, and look at that thing I told them to do, and like, so I love that idea of like the change that their body had to actually accept that it was them ultimately. Um, and I
Absolutely,
really,
and their body interprets it. Like
yes,
you're not
yes.
getting in there telling their mitochondria
Mhm.
how, like, how to multiply, or how you're not explaining how to create another muscle fiber to it. Like, like you're giving a very, very crude stimulus to the body, and then it's going away and doing a multitude of things that we don't understand, like in response to that.
Oh,
Like,
yeah. Yeah. The one of the ways I heard it phrased best, as you were talking, I thought about something that Andrew Sheaf, who's a swim coach, he said this on this podcast about, like, coaches they'll see an athlete the first week and they'll be like, you have training where training's just started up. They're like, "Hey, we got to change this in your technique." And da, da, da. And Andrew's like, "Why don't you just let them get in shape first and then see if it's still worth talking about, 2 months later?" And I'm like, that is brilliant, because if that overly sharpening side, it's almost like we have the sharpeners, and not to label people, but you got sharpeners and you got capacitors, and it's like, I don't want to be an over sharpener, just let that, see if things take care of itself for a little bit before I make, like you said, this isn't the only session they're ever going to do. It does build on itself, and physiology can impact technique, and just understanding that, I think, to me, I just think that's such a brilliant thing. And it's like, almost in the short term, look what I did, look what I changed, almost how a lot of the social media economy runs around the ability to do this instant technique for this, and blah, blah, blah. Like, just to have that patience and understanding is just super valuable. So, wait, I didn't realize we are going to get this far on this topic. Rate of force development, we'll come back. I am super excited for that conversation, Dan. So, thank you so much. What are you working on, a book right now, or the recent book? Do you want to just highlight that again? I just think it's such a good topic. Are you going to be in space again, or anything upcoming that you want to highlight before we hit the stop record button for the day?
Thank you. I mean, my hub is my website, dancleather.com. So books and things are there. Like, I got, planning to put out my first course later on in the year, which will be the biomechanics of bounce. And then at the end of the year, a book on learning how to weightlift. Um, so that's kind of what's planned in that. Yeah, we are going back into microgravity in April. So I'll be flooding Instagram with more floating around videos again.
Awesome.
Um, yeah, so that's what's upcoming. Thank you.
Sounds good. I'm excited for Dan in space someday. But until then, thank you so much for being on the show, Dan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers.